a ripple of tension filled the bustling terminal at LaGuardia Airport. Whispers spread like wildfire as a visibly pregnant black woman stood at the front of a boarding line, blocked by a security guard who refused to let her pass. Onlookers watched the guard's stiff posture, the sneer curling his lip, and a question flickered in their eyes. What on earth was happening here? No one guessed that this unsuspecting woman, her brow creased with anxiety and her hands protectively cradling her belly, was no ordinary passenger. In fact, she was the corporate sponsor for the very airline whose flight she was about to board. The late afternoon sun cast long beams of light across LaGuardia Airport's busy concourse. People pulled suitcases and clutched passports, anxious to make it through security in time for boarding. Among the crowd, a woman named Nadia Johnson drew the eyes of passers-by. Her round belly suggested she was in her late second trimester of pregnancy, and yet she moved with a calm confidence that belied any sign of discomfort. Nadia had flown countless times in the last few months. At 28, she was no stranger to the demands of business travel, nor to the microaggressions that sometimes cropped up when people noticed her dark skin and her power. But she had never expected that her biggest challenge today would come in the form of a security guard who glowered at her every step. That guard, whose badge read R. Dalton, was stationed at the boarding gate for a Delta Airlines flight bound for Atlanta. Nadia approached, ticket and identification in hand, hoping to slip into the pre-boarding queue. She needed a seat closer to the front for comfort, and had the credentials to do so. She traveled frequently as part of her major sponsorship deal. Yet Dalton fixed her with a gaze that froze her mid-step. Something dark simmered in his eyes, setting the stage for an unsettling confrontation. Nadia was not just another weary passenger flying coach. As the daughter of an executive from a well-known philanthropic organization, she'd grown up learning how to navigate corporate circles. She had recently spearheaded a successful collaboration between her company, a major philanthropic foundation, and Delta Airlines. Under her leadership, the foundation provided scholarships for young aviation students, funded communities in need of better transportation, and championed diversity initiatives within the airline's leadership. But there was more to Nadia than her professional life. She was a proud graduate of Howard University, passionate about uplifting marginalized voices. She'd spent years building partnerships aimed at leveling the playing field. While she often flew under the radar, preferring to keep her philanthropic work out of the spotlight, those in the corporate world knew her as a rising star, a woman both brilliant and kind. Her pregnancy, announced publicly a few months earlier, brought her a new wave of attention. Her radiant smile in magazine profiles belied the challenges of traveling so frequently while expecting. Yet Nadia was determined to see her projects through. She was on this flight to Atlanta to finalize details of an upcoming scholarship gala. Nobody at the gate, except possibly the gate agent, knew that her presence was crucial to the airline's public relations and philanthropic success. Raymond Dalton, or R. Dalton, as his badge proclaimed, had been a security guard at the airport for nearly 2 decades. He prided himself on his sharp eye, quick reflexes, and willingness to do whatever it takes to protect the airline. He had served in the military, then transitioned into security work. Over time, a hardened cynicism took root in him. He'd seen suspicious people slip through cracks, heard stories of stolen luggage, and witnessed altercations over trivial matters. Each incident etched away a piece of his empathy until all that seemed left was protocol and procedure. Dalton had an unsettling reputation among travelers. He wasn't shy about giving extra scrutiny to individuals he believed didn't belong in first class or in special boarding groups. Sometimes that meant travelers with unusual-sounding names, those who looked different than him, or those he believed couldn't possibly afford the seat they were in. His co-workers had been wary, suspecting a prejudice he never explicitly admitted, but they kept their suspicions to themselves. He wasn't an outright bully, at least not always. His superiors, though aware of complaints, had considered him a necessary enforcer. After all, he rarely missed a day of work, clocked in on time, and always seemed eager to catch wrongdoing. Beneath that veneer of duty, however, lurked biases that would soon rear their head in the worst possible way. Even before boarding began, a few travelers noticed tension brewing between Dalton and Nadia. She had approached the gate agent with her business class ticket, but Dalton inserted himself, ignoring the gate agent's explanation that she qualified for priority boarding. Instead, he seized Nadia's ticket, squinting as if searching for an inconsistency or a forged detail. Nadia politely repeated, "I have a business elite seat, and I'm also pregnant. If pre-boarding isn't possible, I can wait for my official group, but I have a right to board with business class passengers." Dalton interrupted her, his tone sharp. "Ma'am, you need to wait until I verify everything." His eyes fell from her face to her belly and back again, as though he suspected she was faking a pregnancy. Nadia's cheeks heated, but she remained composed. She was used to unveiling her credentials over and over to people who questioned her presence in certain circles. At that moment, the gate agent, a young woman named Vanessa, tried to intervene. "Sir, Miss Johnson is a VIP passenger. I can vouch for her status with Delta." Vanessa typed into the computer to confirm, but Dalton held up a hand, halting her. "We'll do things by the book," he insisted. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather around them. Some craned their necks to see what the holdup was. Others muttered in annoyance at the inconvenience. The tension was palpable, and it was only just beginning. Nadia exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain calm. She told herself, "Stay polite. Don't escalate. People are watching." Her baby fluttered inside her, as if sensing the rising stress. She began to speak, but Dalton cut her off again. "I see you're traveling alone," he said, his voice oddly accusatory. "Where's the father?" The question stunned Nadia, irrelevant, invasive, and laced with an insinuation that burned. She clenched her jaw. This was too far. "Excuse me," she managed, her voice trembling with controlled frustration. "My personal life has nothing to do with boarding this flight." Dalton shrugged, a mocking gesture. "Just doing my due diligence," he said. He stepped away from the podium, ignoring the gate agent's attempts to whisper a protest, and leaned toward Nadia. "We don't just let anybody board early, even if they claim to be business class." There it was, subtly worded, but the meaning was clear. Nadia had encountered prejudice in different forms, but rarely so blatant. She felt her nails biting into her palms as her hands curled into fists. A wave of nausea washed over her, half from pregnancy, half from anger. Vanessa, the gate agent, tried to salvage the situation. "Sir, let me scan her boarding pass again," but Dalton acted as if she hadn't spoken. He refused to budge, holding Nadia's ticket hostage in his grasp. A hush fell over the onlookers, and somewhere in the distance, an announcement for another flight sounded. Yet all eyes remained fixed on the confrontation at Gate 52. As minutes ticked by, word spread like wildfire through the terminal. Folks who had already boarded peeked through the open plane door. Those who were lined up behind Nadia shuffled uneasily. Smartphones came out, capturing the standoff. Some took photos, others recorded video. A few spectators glared at Dalton, while others whispered assumptions about Nadia. From the corner of her eye, Nadia noticed a middle-aged black couple watching intently. The wife appeared on the verge of speaking up, her brow creased in indignation, but her husband gently placed a hand on her arm, cautioning her to wait. Nadia couldn't help feeling a pang of isolation. She was used to traveling alone, used to being the only black woman in some corporate boardrooms, but never had her sense of otherness been so publicly highlighted. She wondered how this could be happening at a major airport in the 20th century, especially with Delta, a company she had helped champion for its new inclusion programs. Dalton, meanwhile, kept rattling off reasons for his extra caution: the high incidence of fraud, the need to verify if she meets travel requirements while pregnant. He plucked at her ID with distaste, as though it were a counterfeit bill. Despite Nadia's repeated attempts to clarify the situation, he wouldn't let go. His stare was unwavering, and though his voice remained level, it was drenched in prejudice. All Nadia could think was, where was the real authority? Just when Nadia felt she might lose her composure, the couple that had been watching finally intervened. The wife, whose name was Sandra, stepped forward. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying both authority and indignation, "I'm not sure what the hold-up is, but you're holding up an entire flight. I've seen Miss Johnson's ticket with my own eyes." "What's the real issue here?" Dalton's frown deepened. He tilted his head towards Sandra, but before he could speak, Sandra's husband Leonard chimed in. "I'm a retired attorney," he said calmly, "and from what I see, this is borderline harassment. You might want to rethink how you're treating her." Vanessa, the gate agent, exhaled in relief, grateful for the support. She stepped in again, addressing Sandra and Leonard. "I'm trying to let Miss Johnson board. She's in fact a VIP passenger." Vanessa paused, unsure how much she could divulge. "But Mr. Dalton here insists on additional verification." Several other bystanders murmured in agreement. A few had recognized Nadia from a corporate newsletter or from social media announcing the scholarship partnership. One woman even mentioned reading an article about Nadia's philanthropic work in a recent airline magazine. Dalton noticed the shift. People were no longer neutral spectators. The tide of public sentiment was turning against him, and though he registered the warning glances of his co-workers nearby, he was too entrenched to yield. He had no idea that the biggest bombshell was yet to drop. Amid the gathering tension, a supervisory figure from Delta Airlines finally arrived. His name was Marcus Reed, a middle manager responsible for overseeing ground operations. He wore a crisp uniform and carried himself with an air of authority. Quickly, he assessed the situation: a blocked boarding gate, frustrated passengers, and a pregnant woman standing in the eye of a growing storm. "What's going on here, Dalton?" Marcus demanded, crossing his arms. He was familiar with Dalton's style, strict, often overbearing, but usually correct by the airline's rulebook. Still, this scene seemed beyond typical procedure. Dalton squared his shoulders. "I'm ensuring passenger safety. There are inconsistencies here. I'm not convinced she's—" He trailed off, aware that continuing could incriminate him. Marcus turned to Nadia with a polite smile. "I'm sorry for any inconvenience, ma'am. Let me see your boarding pass." He extended his hand, and Nadia quickly handed over the pass that Dalton had refused to give back until that moment. Marcus scanned the pass on the portable device. Within seconds, the screen flashed green. "She's indeed a Business Elite passenger," Marcus announced, relief evident in his voice, "and she's eligible for pre-boarding if she desires." A wave of murmurs swept through the nearby passengers. Dalton's face reddened. Nadia looked at Marcus gratefully, but kept her composure. "Thank you," she said quietly, rubbing her belly in a gesture of self-reassurance. Marcus handed back the pass. "Miss Johnson, you're free to board. Again, I apologize." But just as Nadia stepped forward, Dalton's voice rang out, "I still have doubts." Nadia froze mid-step. She stared at Dalton, baffled by his audacity. Even Marcus looked taken aback. Dalton continued, "We haven't verified if she's even fit to fly. She might be at a stage in her pregnancy where it's not safe to travel." He pressed a document in front of Marcus, some internal code referencing airline policies on late-term pregnancy travel. Nadia opened her mouth to protest, She had her doctor's note in her carry-on, precisely because she was a cautious traveller. She'd flown just last week, with no issues, but the insult felt deeper. Dalton's language implied she was a liar, or worse, that she was some kind of potential threat. Overcome by emotion, Nadia's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. She inhaled through her nose, determined not to let him see her cry. Marcus looked flustered. His experience told him Dalton was grasping at straws, but protocol was protocol. He couldn't simply override a possible medical concern. "Miss Johnson," he said gently, "are you carrying a physician's letter stating your fitness to travel?" Nadia nodded. "It's in my purse." She retrieved the letter, hands trembling with anger. Marcus glanced over it, verifying that she was safely within the airline's guidelines for pregnant passengers. "Everything checks out," he declared, relief returning to his voice. Dalton, however, refused to relinquish. He hadn't counted on Nadia having every document in order. His desire to find a flaw in her story was turning into an obsession, one that would soon lead him down a disastrous path. Marcus gestured for Nadia to move forward. "Ma'am, you're clear to board." A wave of relief washed over her. She just wanted to get to her seat, calm her nerves, and steady her fluttering pulse. But as she reached the boarding door, Dalton suddenly barked, "Stop!" one last time. A collective gasp sounded among the passengers. Even Marcus's patience snapped. "Dalton, enough. I've reviewed her documentation. She's valid. Let her board." But Dalton stepped in front of Nadia, physically blocking the jet bridge. His stance was rigid, and his knuckles clenched at his sides. "I'm not convinced," he growled. "This ticket could still be fraudulent. We don't know how she got it. It's not typical for someone like—" He caught himself mid-sentence, realizing he was about to openly spill the prejudice that had fueled him all along. But the damage was done. Nadia's face went cold. She found her voice. "Someone like me?" she repeated. "A pregnant black woman in business class? Is that the problem?" A hush fell over the crowd. Dalton's lip curled, and he muttered something unintelligible. Marcus glared at him, silent fury dancing in his eyes. Vanessa, the gate agent, looked on, horror-struck. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. A voice from the crowd murmured, "She's a sponsor, you know." Another chimed in, "She's the reason for that scholarship program I read about." And those murmurs, full of recognition, were about to crack open the truth and Dalton's world with explosive force. A ripple of realization spread through those familiar with Nadia's philanthropic work. The hush swelled into a crescendo of murmuring. Travelers who had recognized Nadia from corporate newsletters and philanthropic press releases began speaking up. One woman exclaimed, "I read about her in Delta's In-Flight magazine last month. She's part of the Johnson Foundation that funded the new pilot training scholarships." Marcus overheard these remarks. He'd known the Johnson Foundation was a major partner, but he'd never personally met Nadia. Now, a flicker of recognition crossed his features. The puzzle pieces fell into place. The foundation had donated millions of dollars to various airline diversity programs. Nadia Johnson was no ordinary passenger. She was effectively one of Delta's most important benefactors. Marcus turned to Dalton, voice tight with anger. "Dalton, step aside. You've gone too far." He lowered his tone, careful not to further embarrass the airline in front of bystanders. "This is not just any business traveler. Miss Johnson is instrumental to one of our biggest corporate social responsibility initiatives." But Dalton, though rattled, remained a wall of defiance. Perhaps he sensed the impending fallout and panicked. He might have realized too late that he was sabotaging himself and the airline. Instead of stepping down gracefully, he stiffened, searching for a way to maintain his ground. The cost of that stubbornness would be steep, because the next twist in this confrontation was already on the horizon. Seething with frustration and feeling her baby kick anxiously within her womb, Nadia decided she had had enough. She set down her carry-on bag. Her voice was soft, but it carried an undercurrent of resolve. "Mr. Dalton," she said, addressing him formally, "I want to know your full name and employee ID, and I want the name of your supervisor." Dalton's jaw twitched. "You don't get to demand that," he retorted, but Nadia pressed on. "I have every right. You're not just violating protocol. You've harassed me, questioned my credentials, implied I'm here under false pretenses, and done everything to keep me from boarding. This is discrimination, and I'm done playing nice." The surrounding crowd exchanged astonished glances. Nadia had maintained her composure for so long, but now her voice carried a strength that sent a clear message. She would not be silenced. Marcus interjected, "Miss Johnson, the first so sorry. Let's get you on board and seated. We'll deal with the disciplinary issues separately." But Nadia shook her head. "I will board, but not until Mr. Dalton acknowledges what he's done. This was racial discrimination. I want confirmation that an incident report will be filed." Marcus paused, uncertain how to handle the brewing storm. He could sense that every word, every gesture was now being filmed by multiple phones. Delta's corporate office would learn of this in a matter of hours, if not minutes. A sinking feeling told him this was bigger than a minor gate dispute. This could become a social media firestorm. In the midst of this confrontation, the elevator doors at the end of the terminal corridor slid open. Out stepped Desmond Taylor, Nadia's husband. He was a tall, poised man in his early 30s, wearing a tailored suit and carrying a laptop bag slung over one shoulder. He'd just finished a last-minute meeting at the other side of the airport and had hurried to catch the flight with Nadia. She had texted him about trouble at the gate, but he hadn't expected to walk into a scene of such turmoil. He saw Nadia, eyes blazing with a mix of anger and hurt, and Dalton, who stood like a stubborn sentinel. In 3 long strides, Desmond was at Nadia's side. "What's going on?" he whispered, placing a protective arm around her shoulder. Nadia explained in hushed but furious tones. Desmond's expression darkened. He knew how capable and resilient Nadia was. For her to be this upset, it had to be serious. He turned to Dalton. "Are you the one harassing my wife?" His voice was calm, but there was steel behind the question. Dalton looked Desmond up and down, perhaps searching for something else to criticize, but Desmond was no easy target. He was an entrepreneur, known in tech circles for his startup that specialized in data solutions. Like Nadia, he had faced prejudice before and learned how to confront it head-on. "I'm preventing fraud," Dalton muttered, but his confidence wavered as he realized he was now outnumbered and that each passing moment dug him deeper into a hole he might never climb out of. Seeing Nadia and Desmond side by side only underscored the absurdity of Dalton's stance. Both were polished, confident professionals, exactly the kind of passengers any airline would be proud to have in its premium cabins. Meanwhile, other passengers whispered details about Nadia's philanthropic ties. "She's the face of that new pilot diversity initiative. She's connected with the Johnson Foundation. Did you see that article on Delta's website?" Marcus Reed had heard enough. Stepping between Nadia and Dalton, he said firmly, "Mr. Dalton, we've confirmed Miss Johnson's identity, her ticket, her medical clearance, and now we know she's a key sponsor. This is over." But Dalton, stubborn pride bruised, refused to make a graceful exit. He spat out, "She can't just buy her way into." That was the final straw. Desmond drew a breath to respond, but Nadia gently touched his arm, signaling she wanted to handle it herself. She locked eyes with Dalton. "I didn't buy my way anywhere. I earned my spot through hard work and partnerships that benefit countless communities. And now you're doing everything in your power to shame me for it." The hushed crowd nodded in support. Dalton stood rigid, but his eyes flickered with the first signs of realization he was out of options. And though he didn't know it yet, the full consequences were about to rain down on him with unrelenting force. Marcus, sensing the urgency to de-escalate, turned to Nadia and Desmond. "Let's please continue this conversation in a private space," he urged. "I'll escort you to the VIP lounge if you'd like. We can sort everything out without further disruption." The airport's internal clock was ticking. Flight departure times were looming. This fiasco was delaying not just Nadia's flight, but also every passenger behind her. At first, Nadia considered agreeing. She longed to sit down, let the adrenaline seep from her veins, and ease the tension that was no doubt affecting her unborn child. But then she felt a surge of resolve. "No," she said softly. "Not until we're sure the right steps are being taken. I'm tired of hearing that these issues will be handled behind closed doors, where they can be swept under the rug. This was public humiliation. The apology and acknowledgement need to happen here." A few spectators broke into applause. Others nodded in silent agreement. Desmond squeezed Nadia's hand in support. Dalton, for his part, remained silent, though his jaw was set in a stubborn line. Vanessa, the gate agent, looked on with something like admiration for Nadia's courage. Finally, Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'll call the station manager. We need an official resolution." He shot Dalton a glance that said, "You've crossed a line that can't be ignored." The guard had no idea how thoroughly he had just sealed his fate. Within minutes, the station manager, Linda Morrow, arrived with two other airline officials. Linda was in her early 40s, with a direct yet empathetic demeanor. She walked up to Nadia, Desmond, Marcus, and Dalton, surveying the standoff with a keen eye. "I've been briefed," she announced. "Miss Johnson, Mr. Taylor, on behalf of Delta Airlines, I'm sincerely sorry for what's happened here." She turned to Dalton, lips pressed thin. "Dalton, please hand over your badge and step aside." Dalton's face blanched. "What? I was just doing my job," he argued, voice shaking slightly. For a moment, Linda's eyes showed a flicker of sympathy, perhaps for a long-time employee she'd known for years. But that sympathy was overshadowed by the weight of the situation. She recognized the gravity of having a high-profile sponsor publicly humiliated at the gate. The potential PR nightmare flashed before her eyes. Viral videos, accusations of racism, a betrayal of the airline's carefully cultivated image. "We'll discuss the specifics of your actions in private," Linda said, measured but firm. "For now, you're relieved of duty." She turned back to Nadia. "Miss Johnson, the first understand if you'd rather not fly with us right now, given the distress you've experienced. But if you choose to continue, we'd like to offer our sincerest apologies, along with any assistance you require." A hush fell over the crowd. The guard, once so cocksure, stood with shoulders sagging, the enormity of his downfall beginning to sink in. As Dalton walked away, flanked by another airline official, the crowd parted. Some looked at him with disdain, others simply averted their eyes. Nadia exhaled, trying to release the tension she had been holding in her chest. Desmond rubbed her back soothingly, whispering, "You okay?" She nodded, though her heart still pounded with anger and disbelief. She turned to Linda. "Thank you for stepping in. But please understand, this isn't just about me or my sponsorship. It's about everyone who gets mistreated like this and doesn't have the platform to speak up." Linda nodded gravely. "I hear you and I agree. We'll conduct a full investigation and make sure Mr. Dalton's behavior is addressed. I'll personally follow up with you." Aware of the many eyes still watching, Nadia softened her posture. She wanted to be gracious, despite the humiliation she'd just endured. "I appreciate that," she said. "I still plan to attend the event in Atlanta. My work can't wait." She managed a small, weary smile. Linda offered to expedite Nadia's boarding. "We'll reseat you in first class if you prefer," she said, but Nadia politely declined. "Business elite is fine. My husband and I will make do." She paused, her gaze drifting to the cluster of bystanders who had supported her. She felt a wave of gratitude, but also sadness that such an ugly display had to happen in the first place. After the commotion, Nadia and Desmond finally made their way down the jet bridge. Several passengers clapped softly, offering words of encouragement as they passed. A handful apologized for not speaking up sooner. Nadia thanked them, her voice subdued but sincere. Her energy was waning, and she knew she needed to stay calm for the baby. By the time she settled into her business class seat, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Text messages, emails, social media alerts, news of the incident had already begun to spread. A few videos from gateside witnesses were circulating on Twitter and Instagram, with headlines like "Pregnant Black Woman Harassed at LaGuardia, Delta Security Guard Steps Out of Line." Desmond leaned over, scrolling through the trending tags. He winced at some of the comments, which ranged from outrage on Nadia's behalf to blatant racism from internet trolls. "It's begun," he said quietly. Nadia bit her lip. She had no desire to become a viral sensation for experiencing racism. But maybe this exposure would shine a light on a systemic issue that needed addressing. She typed a quick message to her PR team, summarizing what happened, then put her phone on airplane mode. The flight attendant came by offering water and a pillow. Nadia accepted gratefully, leaning her head against Desmond's shoulder. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew Dalton's troubles were just beginning. Karma had a way of circling back, especially when public outrage joined the ride. For the first hour of the flight, Nadia tried to relax. Desmond massaged her shoulders, and she listened to calming music through her headphones. However, her mind kept drifting back to the gate incident, replaying Dalton's sneer and the sound of his voice. She realized that while she was safe in her plush seat, not everyone in similar situations had the resources or visibility to fight back. She also thought about the upcoming scholarship gala in Atlanta. She was scheduled to speak on inclusion and the importance of representation in the aviation industry. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had just experienced the very discrimination her foundation worked tirelessly to combat. Perhaps she could use this incident, horrifying as it was, to underscore the urgency of her mission. Desmond squeezed her hand gently. "Are you okay?" he asked again, concern etched in his features. Nadia managed a thin smile. "I will be," she said. She knew she needed to be strong, not just for herself, but for the baby and everyone else looking up to her work. As the flight continued, the cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers tried to get some rest, but Nadia stared at the seat back in front of her, mind racing with how to turn a painful situation into a catalyst for greater change. Meanwhile, far behind in New York, Dalton's world was already unraveling. By the time the plane landed in Atlanta, Nadia's phone was flooded with more messages than before. She and Desmond stepped off the aircraft and into the terminal, where a small crowd of well-wishers from the local Delta staff waited to greet them. Word had traveled fast. Linda Morrow had alerted the Atlanta station, ensuring that Nadia and Desmond would be welcomed with utmost respect. Off to one side, the local PR representative, Kathy Mills, approached with a cautious smile. "Miss Johnson, Mr. Taylor, I'm here to escort you to your car. We have a private vehicle waiting." "We're so sorry about what happened in New York." Nadia gave a polite nod. Her posture was still tense, but she appreciated the courtesy. She let Kathy lead them to a discreet exit, away from prying cameras. Yet she could still feel the stares of those who recognized her from the online footage. The incident had gone viral. There was no escaping it now. As they settled into the back seat of a black SUV, Desmond checked his emails. "Wow," he murmured, showing Nadia a note from Delta's corporate office. It was an invitation to meet with the airline's higher-ups the next day. They wanted to issue a public apology and discuss how to rectify the damage. Nadia closed her eyes, exhaustion tugging at her. She'd never asked to become the center of a media storm, but she wasn't about to waste the opportunity to demand real accountability. Back in New York, Dalton sat in a small, windowless office at LaGuardia Airport's administrative wing. His badge had been confiscated. An HR representative and a union rep were present, along with Linda Morrow. Dalton felt cornered, every muscle tight with anxiety. He could tell from their expressions that his fate hung by a thread. Linda spoke first, her voice measured. "We have multiple eyewitness accounts, video recordings, and statements from bystanders and staff. The evidence overwhelmingly indicates you discriminated against Miss Johnson based on her race and her pregnancy." Dalton tried to protest. "I was following protocol," but his voice faltered. He remembered the moment he nearly said, "someone like her." It was on camera. The union rep intervened. "We'll ensure fair representation for Mr. Dalton, but from the evidence, it doesn't look good." Dalton's cheeks burned with humiliation. Linda continued, "Given the seriousness of the incident and Miss Johnson's status as a major sponsor, we have no choice but to suspend you pending a full investigation. Termination is highly likely." Her words rang in the cramped office like a judge's gavel. Dalton wanted to lash out, say something about how he'd served loyally for years, how he was a patriot, but it was clear no justification would overturn the indisputable evidence of his bias. Sitting there, Dalton finally grasped that he had crossed a line he could never uncross. Dalton returned home later that evening to a silent apartment. He lived alone in a modest one-bedroom not far from the airport. He tossed his keys on the kitchen counter, heart pounding as he replayed the day's events. His phone was filled with messages, calls from co-workers, a few from family members who had seen the viral video, and more. He ignored them all. He couldn't shake the sinking realization that he might lose his job. And for what? Because he had let his prejudices override his better judgment? Part of him still clung to the notion that he'd acted out of vigilance, but deep down he knew he'd singled Nadia out based on assumptions. The memory of the scorn and disappointment in his supervisor's eyes made him feel hollow. He cracked open a can of beer and sat heavily on his couch, staring at the wall. The TV blinked, showing news coverage of alleged racial discrimination at LaGuardia. He quickly switched it off. His mind whirled, trying to recall every moment of the confrontation, searching for any excuse that might redeem him. But each time, he came up short. A hollow ache settled in his chest. The world outside was ablaze with righteous anger, and all he could do was sit there, drowning in the consequences of his own actions. As night gave way to the early hours of dawn in Atlanta, Nadia lay awake in her hotel suite. A swirl of emotions kept her from sleeping: anger, sadness, and a renewed resolve. She checked on the baby's rhythmic kicks, silently promising her unborn child that she would fight for a fairer world. A text alert lit up her phone. It was from Linda Morrow, letting Nadia know that Delta's CEO and some key executives wanted to meet before her gala event. Nadia sighed, mentally preparing for yet another draining conversation. But this time she had the upper hand. She spent the next few hours drafting a statement. It would be posted on the Johnson Foundation's official website and social channels, addressing the incident, reaffirming the Foundation's commitment to ending discrimination, and requesting a more transparent approach from Delta. Desmond offered to help edit, but Nadia insisted on writing it herself. She wanted her words raw, honest, and from the heart. Around 7 a.m. she finally pressed upload. The statement went live, and within minutes, her phone buzzed with notifications of support, media inquiries, and outraged commentary aimed at the airline. Nadia closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She knew that by stepping forward publicly, she was inviting scrutiny and debate. But she also knew it was necessary. Her personal ordeal could serve as a catalyst for long overdue change. At 9 a.m., Nadia and Desmond arrived at Delta's corporate offices in Atlanta. They were led into a spacious conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the skyline. Waiting for them were the airline's CEO, Timothy Larson, along with other top executives and a legal team. "Miss Johnson, Mr. Taylor, please have a seat," Larson said, gesturing to plush chairs around a polished wooden table. His voice was subdued but urgent. "We deeply regret what happened. We're here to listen and to make things right." Nadia looked around. On any other day, this meeting might have been a cordial discussion about upcoming sponsorship initiatives. Now, it felt like a tense negotiation. Desmond began, "We appreciate the swift response, but we need more than words." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were proposals for retraining gate and security personnel, updated policies on potential biases, and a new, more robust reporting system for discrimination complaints. Nadia added, "This isn't just about me. It's about creating an environment where no one else, especially someone without my platform, gets treated like that." Larson nodded, scanning the proposals. "We will do everything in our power to implement meaningful changes." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want to personally apologize, Miss Johnson. We value your partnership, but beyond that, we value you as a person." Their words hung in the air, weighty and sincere. Nadia met Larson's gaze, searching for any hint of evasion. Though she remained cautious, she sensed genuine remorse. Perhaps, just perhaps, the airline was ready to confront the rot in its ranks. That evening, Nadia stood on the stage at the gala in Atlanta, wearing a sleek, flowing gown that accommodated her pregnancy. The auditorium was filled with corporate sponsors, scholarship recipients, and media outlets. She clasped the microphone, scanning a sea of expectant faces. She could almost feel the electricity in the room. Everyone waited to hear if she would address the controversy. She began with the usual acknowledgements, thanking sponsors and partners. Then, her voice taking on a solemn edge, she said, "I'd like to speak about an incident that happened yesterday. Some of you might have seen the footage. It involved me being prevented from boarding my flight in a situation fueled by prejudice and racism." A hush fell over the crowd. Cameras flashed, capturing every moment. Nadia continued, "What happened to me is part of a larger issue. It's about the need for equity and respect for all travelers, regardless of their background. My hope is that we, Delta, the Johnson Foundation, and all of you use this moment to push for meaningful change." She paused, her hand resting on her belly, as if reminding herself of her future child. "Because if we don't, who will? If we won't speak up, then these injustices will continue unchallenged." The audience erupted into applause. Nadia stepped back from the mic, heart pounding. She had faced her worst fear, publicly revealing her vulnerability, yet discovered that her vulnerability could also be her greatest strength. Back in New York, Dalton's suspension became a formal termination. The airline, under scrutiny, needed to send a strong message that racism would not be tolerated. Word spread among the airport staff, and while some felt pity for Dalton as a once dedicated guard, most agreed that he had gone too far. The reputation of their airline and the comfort of their passengers mattered more than protecting someone who wouldn't treat travelers fairly. For Dalton, the repercussions extended beyond losing his job. The video of his confrontation with Nadia continued to circulate, tarnishing his name. He discovered that prospective security employers hesitated to hire him once they learned about the incident. His savings began to dwindle, and he found himself scraping for part-time gigs just to pay rent. In quiet moments, Dalton tried to rationalize his behavior. He'd been just doing his job, or he'd thought there was a legitimate reason to suspect fraud. But he couldn't escape the gnawing truth. His prejudice had guided his actions. He watched coverage of Nadia's gala speech, saw the outpouring of support for her, and recognized he had crossed paths with someone who was not only influential but morally steadfast. And in that clash, justice had demanded its pound of flesh. He felt anger, he felt regret, but most of all, he felt alone. In the weeks following the gala, Nadia focused on the scholarship program. Her days were filled with meetings, interviews, and visits to community colleges that encouraged underrepresented students to explore careers in aviation. Delta upheld its promise, publicly rolling out new training protocols to address bias among staff. They also set up a direct line for reporting discriminatory behavior with an independent review board. Social media continued to buzz with discussions of Nadia's story. Many praised her for standing up to injustice in a poised, powerful manner. Others debated the complexities of racism in corporate and public settings. Every now and then, hateful comments would crop up online, but Nadia steeled herself, reminding herself that such negativity only highlighted the importance of her work. One bright spot came when the first group of scholarship recipients began their training. Nadia was invited to speak with them during an orientation session. She looked into their hopeful faces, young women and men of diverse backgrounds, each eager to carve out a future in aviation. "This is why I do what I do," Nadia told them. "Never let anyone tell you you don't belong. This industry, this world needs you, your passion, your drive." She fought back tears, realizing that while the encounter with Dalton had been terrifying and stressful, it had pushed her to amplify her efforts and inspired countless people to believe in their own worth. Months later, Nadia found herself traveling again. This time she was much closer to her due date, and Desmond insisted on accompanying her everywhere. At the check-in counter, the staff greeted her warmly. Word had spread that Nadia was more than just a sponsor. She was a champion for equity who had helped galvanize real policy changes. As they settled into their seats on the plane, Nadia's mind drifted back to that fateful day at LaGuardia. The memory still stung, but it no longer held her captive. In its wake, a wave of empathy, awareness, and reform had emerged. She closed her eyes, envisioning a future where her child, soon to be born, would grow up in a world more inclusive than the one she had inherited. The baby kicked, a small but firm reminder of life's endless possibilities. Beside her, Desmond smiled and squeezed her hand, as if reading her thoughts. Far from the boarding gate where it all happened, Nadia felt a profound sense of peace. Despite the pain, she had refused to let hate win. In doing so, she had not only retained her dignity, but also shone a light for countless others who might face the same battles. If there was karma to be had, it was that prejudice had been exposed, and together, people could rise above it. Nadia's story reminds us all of the power of standing up to injustice. Even when confronted with blatant prejudice at one of the busiest airports in America, she refused to shrink away. By turning a painful experience into a catalyst for change, she proved that there's strength in exposing wrongs and demanding accountability even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's public. Today, many new policies and trainings have been implemented. Countless travelers have voiced solidarity, and opportunities for underrepresented youth in aviation have expanded. Nadia's unwavering resolve became the spark that pushed for meaningful reform, not just for herself, but for everyone who has ever been marginalized or disregarded. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps amplify the message that, together, we can break down barriers and work toward a more equitable future for all.